the moment that we've all been waiting for. Let's do some product hacking. And I've been a longtime fan of Nir's work on practical advice on increasing user engagement. Nir's book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, is a must-read for anyone that's building products, in my opinion. A little more background on Nir. Nir writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. He founded and sold 2 companies since 2003 and has taught Using Neuroscience to Influence Human Behavior course as a lecturer at the Stanford GSB. Thank you, Nir, so much for being here to speak with us tonight. It's such an honor. Please welcome Nir Eyal.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And thank you all so much for coming tonight. Let me just get the presentation up here for you. All right, how we doing? Yay, it worked. Well, welcome, everyone. Wow, packed house. Terrific to see everybody. Quick question for you. How many of you have seen my talk before or have read my book? Okay, oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. So some of it will be a little repetitive because I'm going to kind of show you the basics. But given that so many of you have seen this before or have read the book, what I want to do is to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I hate it when you go to see an author speak and they basically read the book out to you. So I want to give you kind of a high-level overview of how to build habit-forming products. But I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A so we can dive into what kind of engagement challenges you're facing and kind of what's top of mind for you. Does that sound good? All right, terrific. So let's dive in. So if there's one thing we know about these little gadgets that we're all carrying around with us today, is that they have a profound impact on our day-to-day lives and our day-to-day behaviors. And so what I've done over the past several years is to look for these patterns, is to try and figure out what it is about these companies that can so profoundly change users' lives in a relatively short period of time. One of the first revelations I had is that it appeared that many of these companies started out as toys, these nice-to-haves. And yet, within the blink of an eye, these products are making hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're touching hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people. And who am I talking about here? What are the usual suspects? Who comes to mind? Snapchat, right, just raising at a ridiculous valuation, apparently, is the rumor. What else? Facebook, WhatsApp, right? Facebook, think about Facebook, the $300 billion behemoth, right? The first time you saw Facebook, did you really think it would be as gigantic as it is today, touching 1 in every 7 people on the face of the earth? Tremendous, right? What else? WhatsApp was mentioned, right? WhatsApp was purchased by Facebook for $22 billion. There's 22 billion reasons why habits matter, because the fact is that 74% of people who have installed that app use it every single day. Talk about the tremendous economic value that can be created by these habit-forming products. And of course, there's others, right? There's Instagram. There's in the enterprise space, companies like Slack, the fastest-growing enterprise company in history. There's Pinterest. There's all these companies that kind of come out of nowhere and somehow change users' day-to-day behaviors and their day-to-day lives. So I've spent the past 2.5 years researching these patterns, researching what is it about these companies that makes them so habit-forming. I wrote about it in this book, Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. And I have to give you a little bit of a disclaimer because I'm going to kind of shorten this presentation. I usually teach a class at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford and at the Design School that's about 3 weeks long. The book is 250 pages long, but I'm going to condense it into about 30 minutes because you guys are very smart, so we can go through it fast. So let's dive in. Let's start first with what is it that we're talking about when we talk about habits. What is a habit? Very simply put, a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. It's about half of what you do every day of your life, day in and day out, is done purely out of habit. And I believe that we're on the precipice of an age where we can use habits for good. And I'm not alone. Because there's an explosion of companies today, many of them right here in Silicon Valley, who are using the psychology of habit design to help people live happier, healthier, more productive, more connected lives. And that's what I want to help you do today. So here's the pattern. Here's the basic design pattern that we see repeated time and time again in habit-forming technologies. It's called the hook. A hook is an experience designed to connect your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. So connecting your user's problem to your solution with enough frequency to form a habit. And we find that through successive cycles through these hooks, this is how user preferences are formed, how tastes are shaped, and how these habits take hold. So we're going to walk through these 4 basic steps of every hook. A hook starts out with a trigger, to an action, a reward, and then finally an investment. So the first step of every hook is the trigger phase. A trigger is something that tells the user what to do. It prompts the next action. And these triggers come in 2 flavors, 2 types, if you will. We have external triggers, and we have our internal triggers. External triggers you'll be very familiar with, right? These are things in our environment that tell us what to do next, right? We're design people, product people, engineers. We know, UX professionals, we know all about these external triggers. We see them every day. These are things that tell the user what to do with some piece of information in the trigger itself. Click here, buy now, a friend telling you about this great new app that you should check out through word of mouth, all examples of external triggers. But what I think product people don't consider enough is the other type of trigger, the internal trigger. An internal trigger is something that tells the user what to do next. But in this case, the information for what to do is not in the trigger itself, but instead, that information is informed through an association in the user's mind. So what we do in response to being in a certain place, a certain situation, partaking in a particular routine around certain people, and most frequently, when we experience particular emotions, dictates what we do next, dictates the next action that we will take. And it turns out the most frequent internal triggers are not just any emotion, but specifically they are negative emotions. So what we do when we're feeling bored or lost or indecisive or curious or lonesome or fatigued, what we do when we experience these negative states, these negative emotions, dictates the associations that we form for what to do next, instantly, with little or no conscious thought. Part of the research that shows this is the case comes to us from a study that found that people suffering from depression check email more. Now think about that for a minute. Why would that be? Why would people suffering from clinical depression check email more? Well, it turns out that what these psychologists found was that people who suffer from clinical depression experience what psychologists call negative valence states. They feel down more frequently than the general population. And what are they doing to boost their mood to get out of that negative valence state? They're checking email. They're logging in more frequently than the rest of the population. But of course, we all do this to some extent, right? What website do we go to or what app do we check when we're feeling lonely? Facebook, of course. And what about when we're feeling unsure? Before we scan our brains to see if we know the answer, what do? We Google it, right? And what about when we're feeling bored? You know, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have that big project you don't feel like working on right now. What do? You go to Reddit and YouTube, and you check stock prices, and you look at sports scores, and you check Pinterest. All these solutions for this negative valence state, this painful emotion of boredom. We don't like that sensation. And whatever can provide relief from that itch, from that problem, becomes the solution we turn to time and time again with little or no conscious thought. So what do we do with this? I told you could build better products and services knowing this information about habit-forming products, and specifically around internal triggers. How do we build better products knowing the importance of internal triggers? Well, it comes down to fundamentally understanding your user's itch. That it's not good enough to just build for the functional requirements of your product, right? We're really good at designing the functional requirements, but what about the psychological requirements of the itch that your product is scratching? We have to fundamentally understand what that internal trigger is in order to frequently engage people throughout their day. Let's do a quick case study here. Let's take a look at one of my favorite apps, Instagram. How many of you use Instagram? Okay, good, a lot of you, terrific. So let's take a look at what made Instagram such a habit-forming product. How did most people first find out about Instagram? What was Instagram's external triggers? How did you find out about it? Word of mouth, somebody posted to what channels? How did most people hear about it? To Facebook or Twitter, people posted their photos on these other social networks. And there was an external trigger that said, hey, check out my photo on Instagram. You click on that external trigger. It gives you what information to do next. You install the app on your phone. Those app icons are examples of external triggers. And now you start getting notifications from your real friends. Those are examples of external triggers, right? All of these things prompt you to action. Let's talk about the internal triggers for a moment. Did you say you use Instagram, sir? Do you use it a lot? And what was the last thing you took a picture of? If it's suitable for work. Me. All right, so you took a picture of me with Instagram. Terrific. And what's your name? Sal. Sal. Now, I do not remember telling Sal, take a picture of me with Instagram. I never did that, right? And yet Sal had this association in his mind that when he sees something he wants to capture, he sees a moment in time that he wants to hold on to before it disappears, he captures it with Instagram. So Instagram scratches this itch of this fear of losing the moment. Now, what other company, by the way, many of us were kids when this company was big, but what other company comes to mind in the photography space when I talk about the fear of losing the moment? Kodak, right? The Kodak moment. We're all about the same age here, right? Do you guys remember these commercials? All these ads that Kodak would run time and time again on television when we were kids. They used to have these schmaltzy commercials of the puppy dogs running through the grass and the kids who would someday leave the empty nest. And my personal favorite commercial was the one with the grandmother blowing out perhaps her last birthday candles. Do you guys remember that? I didn't make that commercial up. That commercial really did exist. Do you remember these commercials? Why did Kodak spend billions of dollars and almost 100 years teaching people about the Kodak moment? Well, they wanted to create an impression, an association in the user's mind that when you see a moment like this in your life, before it disappears into the ether forever, before it's gone, capture it with Kodak, right? Don't miss that Kodak moment. Instagram did the same thing that took Kodak billions of dollars in almost 100 years. Instagram did it with 12 people in 18 months by having us teach other users what the Kodak moment is all about. I'm sorry, what the Instagram moment is all about. But of course, Instagram does much more than the Kodak camera ever could, because Instagram is also a social network. We use it for other reasons. So the more we go through Instagram's 4 phases of their hook, the more we begin to create associations with other internal triggers. When we're feeling bored, seeking connection, when we feel FOMO. What's FOMO? Fear of missing out. It's actually in the Merriam-Webster Dictionary as of 2 years ago. It's a real word. Why? We don't like that fear of missing out. FOMO feels bad. We don't like that sensation. So to get out of that negative valence state, to relieve our fear of missing out, we take out this solution, this app we find in our pockets. Okay, make sense? All right, so that's a very quick introduction to triggers. There's a lot more to be said about triggers, but for the sake of time, let's move on to the next phase of the hook, the action phase. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. The simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. Let me show you some examples of a few habit-forming products, and I want you to see how simple these key actions are. Something as simple as just scrolling on Pinterest, right? Just that simple act of scrolling. Or searching on Google. Or what could be simpler than pushing the play button on YouTube? These very simple actions done in anticipation of a reward. It turns out there's actually a formula for predicting the likelihood of these behaviors, and it comes to us from a researcher at Stanford by the name of B.J. Fogg. And Fogg tells us that for any human behavior B, any behavior B requires 3 things. We need sufficient motivation, that's the M. Sufficient ability. Ability is how easy or difficult something is to do, that's the A. And a trigger must be present. We just talked about triggers. So think about how powerful this formula is. Any human behavior, offline, online, doesn't matter. Anything you want your user or customer to do requires just these three things: motivation, ability, and a trigger. So let's dive into these three elements. Motivation, according to Edward Deci, this is the guy here who's the founder of self-determination theory. He says that that motivation is the energy for action. It's how much we want to do a particular behavior. Now, motivation is an area of psychology that people have been arguing about for decades and decades, but Fogg gives us these 6 basic levers that we can use to influence human motivation. Because all of us, as human beings, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. We seek hope and we avoid fear. We seek social acceptance and we avoid social rejection. So every ad you've ever seen, every bit of marketing copy, every billboard you've ever seen uses one or more of these 6 levers of motivation. Okay? A lot more to be said about motivation, but for the sake of time, let's move on to the second part of B equals MAT. The A stands for ability. Ability is the capacity to do a particular behavior, how easy or difficult that behavior is to do. And here again, we have these 6 basic levers, these 6 things that we can do to make a behavior more likely to occur by decreasing how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles. Brain cycles is a big one when it comes to the technology industry because it turns out the harder something is to understand, the less likely that behavior is to occur. Social deviance says that we become more likely to do something when we see other people like us doing it. And then finally, non-routine says that we become more likely to do something simply for the fact that we have done it before in the past. And this is why habits are so powerful. Because the best predictor of what you will do in the future is what you have done before in the past. Why? Because the more we do something, the easier it becomes, and therefore we become more likely to do it. What do we call that principle? It's called practice, right? The more we do it, the easier it becomes, the more likely we are to do it in the future. So let me show you how Fogg puts together these 3 basic elements of motivation, ability, and a trigger on this graph that is very useful in a product development context. If you're working on an app, on a website, whatever it is that you're designing for your user to do, whatever behavior, and for some reason, man, they're not doing that behavior, any human behavior. If the user is not doing that behavior, you can ask yourself, do they have sufficient motivation on the y-axis? High motivation, low motivation. Do they have sufficient ability? If something is easy to do, it's way over here. If something is hard to do, it's way over there. And if the user has sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, they cross this threshold, and when the trigger is present, the behavior will occur. Every single time. Online, offline, doesn't matter. Any human behavior. Let me make this concrete. I want you to think of the last time that a phone rang in your life. Think of the last time a phone rang, and you did not pick up the phone. Give me a reason why you didn't pick up the phone. You were busy, right? Maybe you're in the middle of this lecture right now. It's kind of socially awkward to be the dude who takes a call in the middle of a presentation. It's socially awkward. There's a lot of social deviance there to doing that behavior. It's just too difficult to do. So what does that mean? It means you lack ability. So even if you hear the trigger, the call rings, even if you really want to pick it up, you've got tons of motivation, you won't do the behavior because it's too difficult. You're busy at that moment. It's too hard to do that behavior. What's another reason why you may not pick up a phone? Yeah?
You saw the caller ID.
You saw the caller ID. It's a salesperson. It's someone you don't want to talk to, right? So even if the phone rings, you heard the trigger. Even if you have plenty of ability, heck, the phone's right there in front of you, very easy to pick up the call. You don't pick it up because you lack motivation. You don't cross that threshold. Plenty of ability, no motivation. What's one more reason that has to do with a trigger why you may not pick up the call? You don't hear it. Exactly. The phone's on silent. So even if you have tons of motivation, even if the phone is right there next to you and you can pick it up, if you don't hear the trigger, if the trigger is not present, no behavior will occur. I can't tell you how many times I go into these big, expensive design reviews with some of my clients, and I walk in and they have the entire UX laid out in front of me, and they want to show me their beautiful new product and beautiful new app, and I look at them and I say, where's the trigger? Right? What's the intended behavior here? Because for any human behavior, online, offline, doesn't matter, we always need sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, and a trigger. Has to be present. If the user isn't doing the thing you intended them to do, there's only 3 possible culprits: motivation, ability, and a trigger. Okay? Let's do another case study here. Let's take a look at Twitter. How many of you use Twitter regularly? Okay, good. A lot of habituated users. Terrific. Let's take a look at Twitter back in 2009. Here's the Twitter homepage in 2009. Take a good look. Here's the Twitter homepage in 2010. And here's the Twitter homepage today. Oops, today. What do you see? What's changed over the years from what the homepage is today to what it used to be back in 2009? What's different? A lot less text, right? A lot less going on. A lot fewer triggers. A lot fewer call to actions as well, right? Look back at here. See those buttons that say what, why, how? All of those were buttons. They were triggers to take you somewhere else. So what was a trigger? Why was a trigger? How was a trigger? Watch a video is a trigger. Sign in is a trigger. Click here is a trigger. Click here is a trigger. And get started joins a trigger. That is a ton of cognitive load. That's a ton of thinking that the user has to do to figure out what the hell you want them to do. And speaking of, what has always been the intended behavior? In all 3 of these examples, what has Twitter always wanted people to do? Sign in or sign up. That's always been the intended behavior. So what Twitter figured out was, by clearing the cognitive clutter, by making it easier for the user to just figure out what you want them to do, they decrease cognitive load, they increase conversion, and they could start sending people through their 4 steps of their hook. Now, I know what somebody's thinking. Somebody's thinking, yeah, but Nir, back in 2009, people needed all this stuff, right? They needed the video and the what, why, and the how and all that stuff, right? Wrong. Turns out from the discussions that I had with people who actually built this page and watched it evolve over the years, the research that I did for my book and my class, what I discovered was that people never lacked motivation when they came to this page. Nobody ever visited Twitter, even back in 2009, by typing TWITTER.com and said, oops, what's this? Okay, that happened never. People always had some kind of existing motivation. They heard about it from their friends. They saw it on Oprah. Somebody told them about it. They had plenty of motivation, or else they would not have come to the site in the first place. So all Twitter had to do was to increase the user's ability, was to make the intended behavior easier to do, and they observed that behavior to occur more frequently. So the lesson here isn't build a landing page just like Twitter. That's not the lesson. The lesson here is, what can you do to decrease the cognitive load, to make it easier for the user to do the intended behavior? Okay, that's what the action phase is all about. So we figured out the user's itch in the trigger phase. We've come up with the simplest action in anticipation of reward, and we've tried to figure out ways to make it even easier to do. Now it's time for the reward phase. The reward phase, when we talk about the reward, we have to start in the brain. And in particular, an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which was first studied by 2 Canadian researchers by the name of Olds and Milner in the 1940s, who discovered that when they implanted electrodes inside the brains of lab animals, and they connected these electrodes to these tiny levers that these lab animals could press on, and every time they pressed on that lever, they would receive a tiny electrical current to this part of the brain, which activated the nucleus accumbens. What they discovered was that these lab animals would activate their nucleus accumbens incessantly. They would run across painful electrified grids just to push on these levers. They would forgo food and water just to continue to stimulate this part of the brain. In later experiments done on people, the researchers observed similar results. That some people clicked on these machines hundreds of times. Some of them had to have the machines forcibly removed from them to get them to stop activating this part of the brain. Now, turns out you actually don't need electrodes implanted in people's brains to activate the nucleus accumbens, because your nucleus accumbens is activated every single day with things like this: luxury goods, sex, certain junk food, certain chemicals, and of course right there in the center, technology. All of these things activate this very same part of the brain every day. Now, Olds and Milner and much of the psychology community believe that the purpose of the nucleus accumbens was to create pleasure, right? Was to activate this pleasure response. But what we now know is that that's not exactly true. That in fact, the way the brain stimulates us to action, the way the nucleus accumbens works, is not by stimulating pleasure per se, but instead activating what we call the stress of desire. This wanting, this craving, because what we now know that Olds and Milner never did was that the nucleus accumbens becomes most active in anticipation of a reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, the thing that's finally going to make us happy, the thing that's finally going to make us feel good, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So it turns out the way the nucleus accumbens gets us to act is by creating this itch that we seek to scratch. This wanting, this craving, this desirous response. Turns out that there is also a way to supercharge this response. Does anybody want to know how? I'm doing it to you right now. The bit of mystery around the unknown is fascinating. So when I took that long pause and I asked you a question, right, there was that uncomfortable tension of what's this guy going to do next? Why is he not talking? Right? I changed my cadence a bit. And that bit of variability, that bit of the unknown, is in all sorts of habit-forming products. Of course, this comes from the classic work of B.F. Skinner. You might remember Skinner from your Psych 101 class, the father of operant conditioning. Skinner took these pigeons, he put them in a little cage, he gave them a disc to peck at, and every time the pigeon would peck at the disc, at first, they would receive a reward. They would receive a little food pellet. So essentially, Skinner proved that he could train these pigeons to peck at this disc whenever they were hungry. But then Skinner did something a little bit different. Skinner introduced a variable reward. So sometimes the pigeons would peck at the disc, nothing would happen. No variable reward would come out. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed was that the rate of response, the number of times these pigeons pecked at these discs, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Why does this happen? Because we now know that variability spikes activity in the nucleus accumbens, creating this wanting, this craving reflex. And so in all sorts of products that you find most habit-forming, most engaging, the things that capture your attention and won't let go, you will find one or more of these three variable reward types. Rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. Rewards of the tribe are things that feel good, that have an element of variability, and come from other people. So the search for empathetic joy, feeling good because someone else feels good, cooperation, competition, all examples of variable rewards of the tribe. Things that feel good, have an element of variability, and come from other people. Best example I can think of online is, of course, social media, right? When you open your Facebook app, and you scroll through your news feed, you're never quite sure what you're going to find. What are the pictures going to be of? What are the comments going to say? How many likes did something get? High degree of social variability. Next comes a search for resources, what I call rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt stem from our primal search for food and other resources, and of course in modern society, we can buy these things with money. So when many people think of variable rewards, they think of slot machines, they think of gambling, where the mechanism that keeps these games interesting is the variability around what you might win when you play one of these gaming machines. Interestingly enough, we also find the same exact psychology online. You ever wonder why the feed is so popular? Why is the feed, this mechanism, in so many products today? Well, let's take a look at Twitter's feed as an example. When I open up my Twitter timeline and I start scrolling through, the first one's not very interesting, the second one's not very interesting, but oh, maybe the third one's interesting. And what do I have to do to get more of these rewards? What do I have to do? Just keep scrolling. So this scrolling and scrolling is very similar to pulling on a slot machine. Searching and searching and never done searching for these information rewards. Okay? And finally comes rewards of the self, the search for self-achievement. Rewards of the self are things that feel good, that have this element of variability, but don't come from other people and aren't about these material or information rewards. These are things that feel good in and of themselves. They're intrinsically rewarding, intrinsically pleasurable. So the search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control are all examples of variable rewards of the self. Best example I can think of online is gaming, right? So when I play Candy Crush or Angry Birds or the Kardashian game, there's this element of getting to the next level, the next accomplishment, the next achievement, that even if I'm not playing with other people, and even if there's no material rewards, is intrinsically pleasurable. Now, some people are saying, yeah, but you know what, Nir? I'm not much of a gamer. This doesn't really apply to me. But I bet you play this game every single day. Checking those unread messages and clearing them out of your inbox, finishing the to-dos on your to-do list, or my favorite, the one that always gets me, is that one app icon that I just have to click away so I can get that notification gone, are all examples of variable rewards of the self. The search for mastery, consistency, competency, and control. So, before you say to yourself, great, I got it, I have the secret, I'm going to put variable rewards in my products and they're going to be super habit forming, let me give you one big word of warning, that variable rewards are not a free pass. That fundamentally there has to be a connection between the variable reward and the internal trigger. Remember those internal triggers we talked about earlier? So if the internal trigger is boredom, well then the variable reward damn well better entertain. If the internal trigger is loneliness, seeking connection, well, then the variable reward has to connect people together. Because fundamentally, the role of the variable reward phase is to give people what they came for, to scratch the user's itch, but to leave them wanting more. Right? That's what the variable reward phase is all about. A bit of mystery around what the user might find the next time they engage with the product, or making something that is inherently variable, that's inherently difficult to control, and giving the user more agency. Okay? So variable rewards about this bit of mystery around what the user might find the next time they engage with the product. Which brings me to the last step of the hook, the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product. They put a bit of work into the product in anticipation of a future benefit. It's not about immediate gratification. That's what the action phase is for. This is about a future benefit. And the purpose of the investment phase is to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook. Investments do this in two ways. The first way is by loading the next trigger. Investments load the next trigger. Let me show you an example. So when I send someone a message on WhatsApp, when I send that message, when I take the time to invest in that platform to send someone a message, there's no immediate gratification, right? You don't get any points, you don't get any badges. Nothing really happens when you send someone that message. But what I'm doing when I take the time to invest in the platform by sending someone a message is I'm loading the next trigger because I will likely get one of these, a reply. And each reply is accompanied with that little red jewel icon, which is an example of an external trigger that brings me through the hook once again. Okay? So the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by loading the next trigger. The next way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by storing value. And this is a big deal. One of the reasons I love working in technology products as opposed to working with products that are in the physical world, I prefer working with bits as opposed to atoms, is because things in the physical world depreciate. They lose value with wear and tear. But things made out of atoms, things made out of bits, these habit-forming products, habit-forming technologies should do the opposite. Habit-forming technologies should appreciate with use. They should get more and more valuable the more we engage with them. And they do this because of this principle I call stored value. So the more content I put into iTunes, the more it becomes my one and only music library. The more data I give to a site like Mint.com, a personal finance site, or Pinterest for that matter, or many other sites, the more data I give these companies, the better the product becomes. So if you were to log into my Facebook account or my Pinterest account, it actually wouldn't be that interesting to you because I've stored all this value in the form of data that customizes the product to me, to my needs. Okay? Next is followers. Followers is a form of stored value. For example, on Twitter, the more followers I have, the better the product becomes as a way for me to reach my audience. So if Twitter tomorrow were to send out an email that said, I'm sorry, Twitter's no longer free, you're going to have to start paying to use Twitter, who is more likely to send them a check? Someone with 10 followers or 10,000 followers? Of course, it's going to be the person with 10,000 followers because they've accrued all this stored value with that follower count. Finally, reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank. Because my reputation score on sites like eBay and TaskRabbit and Airbnb determines what I can charge for my goods and services. And how likely am I to leave one of these platforms after I've accrued all this stored value? Pretty hard to do, right? It's kind of tough. Makes the product sticky because I've stored all this value in the form of reputation. So that's it. The 4 steps of the hook: a trigger, action, reward, and investment. And it's through successive cycles through these hooks that user preferences are shaped, that tastes are formed, and that our habits take hold. So I warned you that that would be a lot of information. I'm sorry, I condensed a lot of information to just a very short period of time. But here's the most important slide of the presentation. If your business model requires a habit, if your business model necessitates a habit, here's the 5 questions you have to be able to answer. Number 1, what's the internal trigger that your product is addressing? What's the itch? Number 2, what's the external trigger that brings your user to the product? Number 3, what's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward? Number 4, is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And finally, the investment. What's the bit of work that your user does to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? So before I take some questions, there's one more thing I'd like to mention. And that thing is a brief discussion around the morality of manipulation. I know what that nervous laughter is about. That some of you during this presentation were thinking to yourselves, you know, is this kosher? Is this okay to do to people? Is it all right to use their deeper psychology to get people to do the things we want them to do? And if you had that reaction, bravo. Good for you. I think that is the appropriate response to seeing these techniques. Because let's face it, anytime we are designing experiences, we are changing user behaviors to meet our ends in mind, that, my friends, is a form of manipulation. Because the products that we're designing here in Silicon Valley, these products are the kind of things that people take with them to bed every single night. It's the first thing they reach for in the morning before they even say hello to their loved ones. And as Ian Bogo said, our technologies are quite possibly becoming the cigarettes of this century. So what responsibility do we have as product designers, as innovators, as entrepreneurs? What responsibility do we have to use the deeper psychology of habits for good? I encourage you to take this information and find one of the world's problems to fix. To encourage people to engage in something meaningful, in something important, and to use the psychology of habit-forming products to build something that makes people's lives better, more connected, and richer. And I encourage you to borrow from the words of Gandhi to build the change that you wish to see in the world. Thank you very much. And with that, I'd be happy to take a few questions. But before I do, I have a quick favor for you. Everybody hold up your phones for me real quick. Hold up your phones. I want to get a quick picture of you. And while I did that, I just increased your ability, right? Because now you've got your phone in your hands. I've increased your ability to take the key action, which is to go to this URL, www.opinion2.us. Notice it's not .com, it's .us. There's a very, very short survey there about this presentation. It's only 5 questions. It'll take you 30 seconds. Would love to know what you thought of the presentation. Tell me what you thought. As soon as you click submit, you'll be shown a link to my slide share page where you can get all the slides you just saw. That's the reward. So good, because I wanted you to write. So that's also a form of investment. So with that, my Twitter handle is here. My blog is nirandfar.com. You know, if I can be helpful, let me know. A question I often get is, hey, I want to tell you about my startup. I have this question, or I've read your book, and I have, something didn't make sense for me. If you go to my blog, nirandfar.com, at the top right-hand corner, it says schedule time with me. I make time for entrepreneurs every single week. You can just book time right there on my blog. If you have a question, if you read the book and something is not quite clicking for you, happy to chat. I'll also be around afterwards. I'll be doing a book signing. One thing about the books, I brought 1 box of books. It's not enough, but okay, it's all right. Here's the thing. I know some of you have funded startups. Some of you don't have any money. So the books are pay what you wish. All right, so if you paid, I think we put $20 on there because that's what they usually sell for. But if you already paid for your book and you want to take back some money, that's okay. And if you're struggling and you're saying, you know what, money's tight, I don't want money to be a barrier to getting the book. I didn't publish the book for money. I've started 2 companies. You make barely anything on books anyway. I want this information to get out there so that you all can build products to form good habits in your users' lives. So don't let money be a barrier if you like the book. We're going to, I think, sell them up here, and I'm happy to sign them for you. And with that, let's take some questions. Please.
Yeah, so I had a mobile banking startup where our customers actually had to pay. All the examples that you gave, customers were actually not paying for the engagement, for the transaction that they were engaged in.
Right.
So my question is, and when we think of designing loyalty for our customers when they have to pay, the basic premise is that the reward has to be in a predictive manner. Right, so think of an example of a credit card industry or an airline industry where I know that if I book a ticket or I do this transaction, these are the points that I will receive. And what I just heard was absolutely opposite, where we were talking about the variability. I was just a little confused, how do I...
So the question was around, well, where does payment, I think if I distill your question down, where does payment fit into all this? Monetization for a habit-forming product. First, let me start out. Not every product needs to form a habit. Okay, let's be clear. This is not magic pixie dust that you pour in every business and you're going to get the next Facebook. That's not what this is about. I don't make that kind of claim. That this is for products that need to be habit-forming, just like the business models of all the companies I just showed you, Pinterest and Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp and Snapchat and Slack, all of these companies would go out of business if they had to pay to bring users back. Because remember, there are lots of ways to get people to engage with your product or service. You can spend money on advertising. You can work on SEO. You can even have a physical storefront, right? You can open up a taco stand and people will come by your door and buy your tacos, right? So there's lots of ways to engage your customers. If your business model requires a habit, and not every business model does, then this is the formula to follow. Okay? If your product does not need to form a habit, you can still pick and choose. There's lessons from consumer psychology that you can take out of this and apply to making a behavior more likely to occur. BJ Fogg's work, that applies with or without a habit. Variable rewards apply with or without a habit. Investments, all of these things apply separately. But if you have a habit-forming product, if your business model depends on unprompted user engagement, forming this association with an internal trigger that the user experiences frequently in their lives, then the bar is very high. Then you have to have these 4 steps of the hook. And in those cases where a habit-forming product has payment as the ultimate form of monetization, here's the tweetable quote, that monetization is a result of engagement. Monetization is a result of engagement. So it's still in that investment phase, but it comes after these successive cycles through the hook for these habit-forming products. So when you look at a product like Slack, for example, in the enterprise space, it's a product that first you form a habit around. It becomes something that your company depends on. It becomes this product that's very difficult to leave, and that's when you have to start paying. So that's how these habit-forming products convert into monetization. Okay? Or, there's other ways too, right? There's obviously different models. But again, if you think about, Facebook couldn't monetize without engagement. Pinterest couldn't monetize without engagement. All of these companies rely on engagement to bring in the monetization. Okay, please.
Can you think of a business model that has to the hook model that you're describing here, where we walk a client through triggering action, but we're reversing investment with reward. So we're going trigger action, investment, reward.
Can you give me an example of a product that does that?
That's why I was asking you.
Yeah. No. I can't think of one. Because remember, the variable reward is where the user's itch gets scratched a little bit. It's the little thing it's the thing that they came to have alleviated, right? It's the instant association that loneliness, I'm checking Facebook. Boredom, I'm checking YouTube or Reddit, right? It's these instant associations to get relief. Once I'm there, that's when I invest, after the variable reward. Many companies I see where they screw up the order of the hook, they're asking the user to do too much up front. They want the investment. First, you got to pay, and then you'll get the good stuff. But that's not the model here. The model here is engagement, right, is forming this habit, and then leading to the eventual investment. And the investments, the first few passes of the hook, mind you, the first few passes are something as simple as data, right? Accruing followers, content, learning, acquiring the skill of using the product itself. It's only through successive passes later on, right? Maybe the 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe 20th time that they pass through the hook that they start making these more serious investments in the product. Okay, please.
Both of these questions made me think of rewards programs or loyalty programs, and what they don't do is the Skinner thing. Right. It's a predictable reward. I'm going to get 300 points for this, credit card purchase or for this airline ticket. Right. Has anybody had success in saying, here's our rewards program. You're going to get your 100 points for spending $100, but you also might get 150, or you might get 95. Yeah.
Well, I think there are some elements of that. I mean, I can just think of one example off the top of my head. I'm guessing some other people in the audience might be able to think of others. The question was in the finance space around rewards. Why do the rewards tend to be predictable? One thing that one company does, actually several credit card companies do, is they change the rewards on you. Right? This month it's gas, you can get 5%. The next month it's going to be groceries, you get 5%. Well, why are they doing that? There's this keeping you on your toes to keep you engaged around where you might be able to find the deal. Please.
So with the exception of Kodak, 95% of your examples come from tech, and aptly so. What other product-forming or habit-forming products outside of tech have you seen?
Right. So there are lots of habit-forming products, and habit-forming products have been around for a very long time. I use tech because that's my background, and that's the number one reason I wrote this book, was because I started 2 tech companies. I know how difficult it is to create a product that people actually want to use. I've been in your shoes. I know how hard that is, and so I wanted to give product developers the kind of these tools that I learned being in the advertising and gaming space, where my last company, so that you can create healthy habits for your users, so that you can help people live better lives because of using these techniques. So that's why it's a very tech-focused book. It's very actionable about do this, do this, do this, for people who are, frankly, building tech products. But there are lots of habit-forming products out there that I think are fascinating that have very little to do with tech. One of my favorite examples, just because it's top of mind because we just had the Super Bowl a few weeks ago, is spectator sports. I mean, can we all agree that spectator sports is ridiculous? Right? For a minute, let's just think about this for a minute. I'm not a big. I don't mean to diss anybody who's really. I know it's kind of a religion, but especially in America. But I don't really watch sports, but what I do love doing is going to watch people watch sports. If you go to your local sports bar and you just take a seat, but you turn around, don't look at the TV, look at the people who are watching the game, and you will see anguish. You will see people tearing their hair out. You will see people screaming and getting all upset over this game, right? Over this variable reward that is inside the game. A lot of it is chance. A lot of it is where does the ball go? Where does the puck go? Does it get into the hoop or not? Of course, there's an element of skill, but there's a lot of luck to all this. There's a lot of variability. And of course, that's what keeps it interesting. So variable rewards are in all kinds of experiences. I think spectator sports is a great example of these hooks, of the more we engage. Why do we build these loyalty to teams? Many people form these loyalties to a team because it's what they have invested in. They have these memories of, well, this is the team that I used to root for with my dad or with my mom. This is kind of my identity, right? It's a city I'm from. It's not necessarily, it has nothing to do with the players. The players come from all over the country, all over the world. It's not a personal affinity. You don't know those people playing the game. But there's this investment of, well, this is who I am. This is what I've done for so long. And this is part of, I think, a great example of an offline hook. And there's others, of course. Please, in the back there.
You talked a lot about how hooks are formed and the connection between trigger and everything. Can you talk a little bit more about how they're measured, how successful they are? What is that turning point in that trigger that needs the user to go from the first step to the second?
Yeah. So the question was, how do we measure this stuff? How do we know if we're successful at forming these habits? So let's make sure we reiterate the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to not need the external triggers at all. We need the external triggers to send people through the hook, and we'll always use them, right? We'll always send notifications and messages and emails. We'll always do that to some extent. But the ultimate idea is that the user uses the product with little or no conscious thought. They're unprompted, right? You're checking Facebook without really thinking why you're checking Facebook, right? That's what these companies rely upon. So the way we measure this stuff, the best technique that I know is cohort analysis. So we still have to use build, measure, learn. Does everybody know build, measure, learn? Right? Everybody know lean startup, build, measure, learn? Right. So we all know that customer development, Steve Blank, Eric Ries. This process of build, measure, learn doesn't go away. What I want to add to the discussion, what I'm hoping to improve entrepreneurs' lives was to help make one thing that was always really difficult in my last company, which was trying to figure out what the hell do we build, right? That's where we always got stuck. We used to build, well, what does the hippo say we should build? Does everybody know who the hippo is? Who's the hippo? The highest paid officer, right? That's how we used to build software, right? Back in the day, we would build whatever the hippo says to build. We'd go into a room, close the door, and we build the software. Well, now we don't do that, right? Now we're enlightened. Now we use customer development. We use lean startup. We talk to our customers, and we still have to do that. But my problem was, who do we listen to? Do we listen to the loudest customer? Do we listen to the greatest percentage of the customers? What I want to add to the discussion is how can we find out what users will do by understanding how they think, even in ways that they are not able to articulate. This is the big difference, that in customer development, we still have to do customer development. We can't shortchange it. But there's all these behavioral patterns, all these behavioral quirks, all these design patterns that we've seen used time and time again that predict people's behavior with a high degree of accuracy, but in ways that they are not able to tell us they will behave. It's these non-articulatable behaviors that I think is the real value of understanding consumer psychology. And the only way to measure that, to track that, is to do build, measure, learn. But what I hope to add to the discussion is when you're thinking of what do I build, remember, the build phase in lean startup is where all the blood, sweat, and tears and money all go. Measuring and learning, that's fun, right? That's easy. The hard part is the building phase. So instead of saying, well, what do our customers tell us we should build? Or what does the investor think we should build? Or what does the highest paid officer think we should build? We can look at some kind of framework based on consumer psychology to help us figure out where our product might be weak, how we can improve it, and then we use cohort analysis to see if the rate of return, if people using the product more frequently, is increasing. That's the best in class that I've seen. Please.
Okay, my clients are people who are in the high-tech space where you're paying $100,000 for a product rather than selling to consumers. So I'm trying to think of how to apply this, because normally the way you engage to get people there is to have them follow you until such point as they trust you enough to buy from you. So I'm trying to think if this can be applied to some sort of marketing campaigns, whatever, where you are encouraging them just to get to know you better and to get your product.
Right. So the question was, with enterprise products, particularly those that have a long sales cycle, where does this fit in? The short answer is it probably doesn't. Because remember, the definition of a habit is a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. If the first step of your sales cycle or your user experience is first sell the darn thing, like go in front of some IT committee and sell them on why they should buy your product, that's the opposite of a behavior done with little or no conscious thought. That's a lot of conscious thought. Right, so that's part of the funnel process. That's part of the selling, the onboarding of the product itself. Now, that might not be something you create a habit around. But where you might need to create a habit is users actually engaging with the product after you've sold it in. Right, a lot of companies that I see say, we won the deal, and it's on everybody's machine, but nobody's using the software. And so that's where you might need to refer back to this hook model to figure out how to get people to engage with it. The other example in the enterprise space is if you're building a product like Slack, like GitHub, like Stack Overflow, where these, like Salesforce, these enterprise products that were first used by frontline employees, right? First, they were used by people actually on the front, and then after the manager saw, hey, everybody in the company is using this product, where do I send my check? That's when they started paying for it, right? Then it percolated up the organization. Same rules apply. Still need these hooks, whether it's an enterprise or in the consumer space.
I was thinking more that in the marketing campaign leading up to the meeting, they don't just meet with you in the sales meeting. Usually there's this whole process. I didn't know if you could hook.
Yeah. So the question was, what about in the marketing space? So it was interesting. I gave a presentation in front of 700 real estate agents, right? And they came to me originally and they said, we want to make buying a home a habit. There is no way to make buying a home a habit, right? Why can't you make buying a home a habit? One, it doesn't occur frequently enough, right? It's a decision that people make once every 5 years, maybe once a decade. It doesn't occur with sufficient frequency. We didn't talk about frequency, but that's a very important characteristic of a habit-forming product, is that the behavior occurs frequently. And two, it's a decision done with a lot of conscious thought, right? People debate how are they going to afford the home and which one should they buy, and is the kitchen big enough? And a lot of conscious thought. So buying a home will never be a habit. But then after they saw this workshop, we did a much longer 3.5-hour workshop, many of these agents had these ideas for how they could become habits in their user's life. One agent came up to me and said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to attach to the internal trigger of financial angst, that whenever you feel stress about money, you're going to call me. Anything having to do with money, right? That's something that happens about, she thought that it occurs within her client base about once a week. Doesn't matter if they're in market, out of market to buying a house. Anytime they're stressed about their kid's college fund, what the real estate market is doing, what the stock market is doing, their 401k, I want them to call me. That's their habit. And call me once a week, call me twice a week, so that eventually when they decide to buy or sell their home, guess where they're going to go? Monetization is a result of engagement. And there's other examples. Another agent said, I want to be the person they look to, right? He was thinking about building a website or some kind of app around what's going on in my community. So you're not going to go online to see what's happening in your neighborhood. You're going to come to me, the real estate agent, and I'm going to tell you about the local play, and I'm going to tell you about this new chef who opened a restaurant in town, and you're going to check in with me a few times a week about what's going on in your neighborhood. So that's the habit that he wants to create, so that eventually you think of them when a monetization event might occur. Please.
Yeah, so you talked a lot today about how to build habits for products. And I'm just curious on your thoughts on, once we know we're in a cycle, right? Like we're all here now, we know that this is the cycle we're in. What are your thoughts on us being aware of that and then being able to remove ourselves?
Yeah, thank you. I was waiting for this question. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So I told you the first reason I wrote this book. The first reason I wrote this book is because I want to help product developers, designers, entrepreneurs. I want to help you create products that I truly believe can improve people's lives by forming these healthy habits. Okay, I really do think we can improve people's lives by forming these habits. The second reason I wrote this book is because, like Paul Graham, I believe that the world is becoming a potentially more addictive place. Okay? And I worry about that. But the remedy to a world that is becoming an increasingly potentially addictive place is to understand what's going on. Is that when we understand how these hooks work, that when we understand that these products did not become this way by mistake, right? They weren't born this way. They evolved into many of these techniques, or they were designed with these techniques in mind in the first place. When we understand that these products are designed to be engaging, they're designed to keep us coming back mindlessly, we can do something about it. And let me be the first to raise my hand and say that I struggle with overusing these technologies. I mean, if you read my blog, you'll see that half my blog posts are about how to build healthy habits using habit-forming technology, and the other half of my blog posts are about how to break unhealthy habits with technology, because I struggle with this all the time. I couldn't have written this book if it wasn't for an app called Freedom. Anybody use Freedom? Freedom is this very simple app. I mean, it's almost stupid how simple it is. It's a pre-commitment device. So when I need some focus and I need freedom from the web for a while, and I really need to get something done, I hit the Freedom button. I tell Freedom how long I want freedom, right? Let's say I do my writing in 2-hour blocks on a good day. I put in 120 minutes, I push OK, and it shuts off my internet. It doesn't turn it off, it shuts it down, so the only way I can get back online is to reboot my machine. So what that does is when I'm writing, and writing is hard. I mean, it doesn't come easy for me. When I'm stressed about, oh, I don't get this part, this is boring, and this is difficult, what I used to do was get online, right? Check email, check Facebook, see what's going on Twitter. Well, now I made that process a little bit more difficult. I inserted a bit of mindfulness into what used to be this mindless checking, right? It's just a little bit harder. Another example, can I give you a personal example? We're all friends here, right? I wrote this article on TechCrunch about 1.5 years ago called The Strange Sex Habits of Silicon Valley. I told you it'd be personal. And where I described this problem that I was having, I know many other people do too, even if they don't admit it, that we use our gadgets late into the night when we should really be spending quality time with each other. So I was finding that I was not spending quality time with my wife. We weren't reconnecting. And so because what we were doing, what we found ourselves doing night after night was she was fondling her iPhone and I was playing with my iPad instead of actually being together. And so here's what I did. I went to the hardware store and I bought an outlet timer. They have these $5 outlet timers at Home Depot, anywhere. And I took that outlet timer, and anything you plug into that outlet timer will shut off at a given time of day. I plugged that internet timer into the wall. I plugged my internet router into the timer. So every night at 10 p.m., the internet at my house shuts down, right? The router turns off. I took the phones that used to charge near our bedstands. I don't do that anymore. They charge out in the living room, right? We don't want those triggers in our bedroom. And so what did I do? I just broke the hook between the trigger phase, when I felt this stress of what's going on, right? I need to check email, or what am I doing tomorrow, or maybe something is happening on Facebook. Whenever I feel that bit of stress, now that action phase became more difficult. I could still go online, right? I could still unplug the router and plug it back in, but now it inserts a bit of mindfulness. Now I can actually think to myself, wait a minute, is this actually important to do right now? Or am I doing this just because it's out of habit? So I'm just as much of an advocate for building healthy habits, for building products that create healthy habits, as I am for breaking these hooks for bad habits. Because, look, if we don't control our habits control us. So we have to figure out how to get greater control of these technologies to make sure we can put them in their place. Let's go in the back there. Yeah. Right. So I focus. You're absolutely right. So some products you don't want any kind of variability whatsoever, right? You want consistency. I would say that product has already formed a habit because there's no other choices, right? When you have a toaster on your, it's not like you have multiple toasters on your nightstand. Or imagine what would happen. Actually, let me give you an example here. What would happen if when you open your fridge? You know how that little light turns on and off, right, when you open your fridge? What if instead of the light turning on and off, something different was in your fridge every time? What would you do, right? I'm guessing you would open it like 1,000 times to see what's going to come up next. It's ice cream. No, it's pickles. No, you're going to keep opening it to see what happens. So it's not that every product that forms a habit has to have these variable rewards in it, especially in this offline space where there isn't choice. It's that to get users engaged, to start them down this cycle around habit-forming technologies in a competitive market where there's all kinds of other habit-forming products, variable rewards become very important to get people down this path, particularly in the beginning, particularly when the product is in what I call the vitamin phase, when the product is just a nice to have, it's a toy, it's some piece of entertainment. Yes? Tell me, by the way, tell me how we're doing on time, okay? 2 more questions. Do you mind also bringing the books over? Thanks. Oh, they're there already. Oh, terrific. Thank you so much. Subliminal techniques. Yeah. So subliminal techniques, unfortunately, there's that study that where they had people in the movie theaters back in the 1950s, I think it was, and they would show them a movie, and then in the middle of the movie, for a split second, they would show them popcorn and eat and hungry, and hoping that would encourage them to go out into the concession stand and buy more food. And the study actually showed that did occur. The problem was that the study was completely fake. That it was not a real study. It was kind of a sham. And so subliminal marketing has actually been shown to not be very effective and rather deceptive. So would not recommend that.
So, do you have any insights about the decay?
Oh, you're next. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Any insights about the decay decay of triggers and rewards, their impact over time?
Right. So that's a great question around variable rewards. So what happens when products become less variable over time? And this is a very important point because we find that there's two types of variability. There's infinite variability, and then there's finite variability. Let me give you an example. Do you all remember Farmville? Back in 2008, 2009, everybody in the world was playing Farmville, fastest growing game in history at the time. What happened? Why aren't we playing Farmville anymore? Why aren't we still playing Super Mario Brothers and Pac-Man? Why do these kind of games come and go? Why were they so faddish? Well, let's think about it for a minute. Let's think about Zynga. Zynga at the time when they released Farmville, they were a $10 billion company. They're unfortunately worth a lot less today. After they released Farmville, what was the next game that came out after Farmville? Cityville. And then Chefville, and then Frontierville, and then Farmville 2, and users kept seeing the same frames again and again and again, and users eventually figured out that what was once variable became predictable. So that's an example of what I call finite variability, an experience that becomes more and more predictable with use. If you think about media, for example, most media, right? Nobody wants to read yesterday's news. Yesterday's newspaper is worthless. Right? Nobody wants to see a movie more than once or read a book more than once. There's a few cult classics, but when you think about how many movies you actually take the time to watch over again after you know how everything wraps up, after you know how the happy ending occurs, very, very few, right? Almost none. It's not that they're bad businesses. It's just that they have to be set up to constantly churn out new. They're set up as studio models, book publishing and game publishing and movie studios. They're set up to constantly make new. Why? Because they know that there's this finite end to the variability, right? Super exciting before you knew what was going to happen on Breaking Bad, but then when you knew the storyline, you didn't watch the whole series again. You knew what was going to happen. It wasn't variable anymore. There wasn't any mystery left. So if you compare finite variability to products that have infinite variability. So if you think about products that engage people, right? So when you think about LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, these products engage people's real information, their real lives. So when I'm on LinkedIn, for example, I'm seeing a new article and I'm seeing someone change a job and I'm seeing something interesting happening in their life, there's a much higher degree of variability. It's an example of infinite variability. It doesn't mean that somebody else might not be able to take that habit away at some point, and there's three ways to actually take a habit from somebody else. But those two, that's a big differentiation, that if you're creating a product that eventually with use becomes predictable, it can be difficult to keep people engaged. You're leaving yourself open for somebody else to take that customer away, like the toaster example. This gentleman was next.
For some inspiration, can you give your favorite examples of habit-forming products that are really healthy?
Yeah. So the question was, for inspiration, can I give some examples of habit-forming products that are healthy, that are building healthy habits? Let me just say that I don't mean to rag on the products I talked about. I quite admire them, and I think they actually benefit the vast majority of people's lives. Obviously, the world is voting with their actions, right? The fact that we use these products, the fact that they've enhanced our lives to the extent that we keep using them, I think is great. I think, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and WhatsApp and Slack, these products have enhanced our lives. I don't want to go back to a world before these products existed. So I think for the vast majority of people, I think these products actually do create healthy habits. They keep people connected in a way that I think is very beneficial. That being said, I think there's a lot more we could do. So I look for companies to invest in. I do quite a bit of angel investing, and I'm always looking for companies that have great hooks. One company I'm particularly proud of because it's in the news recently is Product Hunt. Everybody know Product Hunt? Yay, Product Hunt. So if you look on the cover of my book, the guy right below my name is with Ryan Hoover. Ryan Hoover is the founder of Product Hunt, who at the time, he actually reached out to me back in 2002 and said, hey, I put you on this list on my blog of 13 people I want to meet in 2013. I said, hey, dude, I'm right here. Let's just have a drink or something. So he came down to Palo Alto. We had a hamburger together, and he said, I want to help you somehow. I like what you're working on. I read your stuff on TechCrunch. How can I help you? And I said, well, I'm thinking about taking my thinking and kind of putting it into this book. So he helped me put out the book. The next thing he did after we finished working on this book started working on Product Hunt. And so he built the hook into the experience. Now, Ryan deserves 110% of the credit for that company. They just raised $6.2 million from Andreessen Horowitz. It's doing unbelievably well, and he and his team deserve all the credit. But it's great to know that his thinking around how he designed the product has this hook model built into it. There's other examples as well. There's a company called 7 Cups of Tea, which some of you might have heard of. It's actually was in a Y Combinator class a couple of classes ago. 7 Cups of Tea is trying to disrupt the psychotherapy market. So it turns out that if you're a soldier suffering from PTSD, if you're the parent of a child with Down syndrome, or anybody who just needs someone to talk to, a relationship that they might have gone to a psychotherapist for, going to a therapist is expensive, takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. You got to figure out when the person's available, are they any good, how much money do they cost? There's a lot of friction to just getting someone to talk to. Well, what 7 Cups of Tea does is form this healthy habit of when you need someone to talk to, you can pick up your phone. There's an app that one click away, you can talk to a trained listener, someone who can help you in that time of need. What's interesting about this product is that after you use the product for a while as someone who's being listened to, you actually learn the product takes you down this path of actually teaching you how to be a listener yourself. And it turns out that people who do that get better. That by helping others, by being the kind of person that can not only be listened to, but also listen to others, by taking you down this path through these hooks, you form this habit around giving, around helping other people, and people really do get better. And there's other companies as well. I invested in a company called Pantry Labs that's trying to build healthy eating habits. So there's lots of these companies, thankfully, and more. But go build more, everyone. What do you think? Do we have time for one more? Okay, one more. You pick it. Who? Okay.
So how do we? So you showed us some slides about the different choices, like when you're lonely, you go to Facebook, and you go to YouTube, and all those things. How do you change those different choices?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so the question was, hey, look, Facebook already kind of owns the loneliness habit. How do I get that habit, right? There's lots of products that were habit forming before. You asked me about non-tech habit forming products. I mean, look, these products don't exist in a vacuum, by the way. Let's remember that all the time we're spending on these products used to come out of things like TV, right? The average American watches 5 hours of TV a night. I would much rather have people interacting with other people through these technologies than just sitting there like lumps watching flashing lights on their television sets. So how does a product capture that habit? How do I now want to check Facebook or Twitter or one of these social products as opposed to plopping down on the couch and watching TV? There's 3 ways to steal someone else's habit. And I say steal, but it's not like it's criminal, of course. I just don't know a better word for it. How do you capture? How do you appropriate? Ooh, that's legal. So how do you appropriate? Yeah, that's true. How do you capture? How about capture? How do you capture a customer habit for one of your competitors' products? There's 3 ways. The first way is to get people to go through the hook with greater velocity. If you can send people through the steps of trigger, action, reward, and investment faster than your competitor, you have a chance of stealing their habit, of appropriating their habit. An example of that happens when there's a change in interface. This typically happens when there's some kind of big change in an interface that allows primarily that action phase to occur faster. So for example, when we went from desktop to laptop to now mobile devices and very soon wearables, every time there's that interface change, the habit deck gets reshuffled. Now habits that used to live on this old interface have to be ported over to the new interface. And that typically allows people, many times, because the product is easier to use, you can pass through these 4 steps faster. So if your product, but it doesn't have to be because of an interface change, if you can figure out some innovation that reduces the friction to pass through the hook faster, you have a chance of taking that habit away. The second way is by increasing the frequency of passing through the hook. So the first way was velocity through the hook. The second way is frequency throughout people's day of going through the hook. So more hooks per day. Right? So this is also something that tends to happen with an interface change. The fact that we now carry these devices with us means that we can do these behaviors more frequently than we could when they were back at our office or our home. And what's going to happen now with the Apple Watch or whoever wins the watch market? I, by the way, predict that in 5 years, we'll all have something on our wrists because the triggering potential is amazing, right? There's all these new opportunities to create these new habits, hopefully many of them healthy habits, now that the interface changes. Because now people can pass through the hook more frequently throughout their day. The third way is by making the reward more rewarding. So that critical third step of the hook around the reward phase, if you can be the product that makes the reward more rewarding, if you can make something that's better, more exciting, more interesting, scratches the user's itch better than your competitor, you have a chance as well. An example there might be Snapchat versus Facebook. Right? Why did Mark Zuckerberg almost cough up $3 billion for Snapchat? Well, let's do a little head-to-head here. What's unique about a Snapchat message versus a Facebook message? What do we all know happens on a Snapchat message? It explodes, right? It's ephemeral. You get the message, and then the message is gone. So what does that do to the sender's ability curve around sending a message? Right? Now it becomes easier. There's less social deviance around posting a message. So these messages tend to be more spontaneous, more flirty, sometimes more sexy, more interesting, more funny than just your standard Facebook message. And so what does that do to the receiver? Put yourself in the mind of two messages have just been sent to you, one from Facebook, one from Snapchat. Are you going to open up the Facebook message from Aunt Matilda, or are you going to open up the Snapchat message from somebody you've been flirting with? Right? The Snapchat message, the reward, the promise of what you're going to find when you open that app, the reward is more rewarding. And it's a threat to a company like Facebook that has these existing habits. Okay? Did you want to say something else? No?
We have some prizes, and thank you very much, Nir. And I'm actually going to ask you to pick out the top two from here. And in the meantime, we have Susan is our sponsor today. She sponsored the gifts of the Mrs. Moskowitz's Munchies. So I'll have her give a few words about Munchies.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mrs. Moskowitz, and the Munchies are an award-winning snack food, very healthy, and currently selling online and at the Stanford Graduate School of Business Arbuckle Cafe. And I am a product of the Stanford Ignite program from the class of 2013, and that's why Munchies are available, because of the support from my business school friends. So I hope you win. And if not, I'm going to be selling some Munchies too, along with the book.
Thank you, Susan. And also, when you came in, if you didn't drop in your business card, we're going to be drawing prizes. Ruben's going to be walking around with the collecting additional business cards. So if you haven't put in your business card, go ahead and put it in there, and we'll also draw prizes from there as well. Nir, did you pick out your favorite?
At Love with Food and at Tango Me.
All right. Subscribe, surprise, delight, snack, enjoy, repeat with Love with Food. All right. Congratulations. And the second winner is People Always Find Interesting Conversations Here, Alexander Borisov with Tango Me. All right. Can you both come on stage and we'll hand you guys the prizes?
Mm-hmm.